I know that there is a video whereby I said that the Lord Almighty is not involved in doing businesses, and He is not involved in doing jobs. It is very true that He is not involved in doing businesses and jobs. It is not a lie, it is true. We even know that it is very true that Yeshua said that we cannot serve both Him and money. Matthew chapter 6 verse 24. But even if it is true that He is not involved in jobs and businesses, does it mean that He is not involved in all of them? Those jobs and businesses that the Lord Almighty is not involved are those that are done for selfish gain. Those businesses that are done for selfish gain, those are the businesses that the Lord Almighty is against.
They walked on into the city, and then Yeshua went into the temple and started a small riot. He chased out anyone who was buying or selling in there, and he turned over the tables that the money changers were using. He kicked over the chairs of some people who were selling doves and would not let people carry anything.
It says in the law that Yahweh's house should be a place where people from any country can come to pray. But by doing all your business here in the temple, you have turned it into a den of thieves.
The religious leaders heard it, and they were more determined than ever to destroy him. But they feared him because so many people had become convinced that he was right in what he was saying.
Those people who were doing business in the temple and they were chased away by Yeshua. They were not doing the business. They were not doing those business so that they will get the money to help the poor. But they were doing it for selfish gain. And that is why Yeshua condemned them and drove them away from the temple. It was because they did it for selfish gain, and they would extort from the poor the little they had. Those businesses that are making money from the poor, and those businesses that can deny you the time to spend with the Lord, and even those jobs that can deny you the time to spend with the Lord, those are the jobs and businesses that the Lord Almighty is against. Receive these greetings, brothers and sisters. How are you? There is something that I want to make it clear to you about jobs and businesses. Every message that I've been preaching, or most of the messages that I've been preaching, even concerning jobs and businesses, it was because I was led by the Spirit of the Most High to preach those things. It was not because I led myself or I was led by anyone to preach those things, but it was because I was led by the Spirit of the Most High. That is why when you watch those videos, you will see how uplifting they are, how powerful they are, and how beautiful they are. When we are led by the Spirit of the Most High to preach a message, and we do not lead ourselves, what does this mean? It means that we may not be fully aware of why He has led us to preach that particular message. And when we happen not to be aware of the reason behind the message, we happen to be aware later. It is very possible not to be aware of the complete meaning of the message or having the complete understanding of the message. I am telling you, it is very possible for this to happen. It is very possible for a preacher like me not to have the complete understanding of the message, but to have the partial understanding of the message they are preaching. And after we happen to have the partial understanding of the message, we happen to preach the message without being specific. When you happen to preach a message without being specific, the message will not be misleading, but it will only lack some information that is required. And those are the information that I am about to deliver today concerning jobs and businesses. I know that there is a video whereby I said that the Lord Almighty is not involved in doing businesses. and he is not involved in doing jobs. It is very true that he is not involved in doing businesses and jobs. It is not a lie, it is true. And in order to show that he is not involved in jobs and businesses, that is why the early disciples like Peter and John, they left their jobs in order to follow Christ. And that is why a tax collector who is called Matthew, he also left his job in order to follow Christ. And that is why he said that whoever does not forsake all that he has, he cannot be my disciple. Luke chapter 14, verse 33. We even know that it is very true that Yeshua said that we cannot serve both him and money. Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. But even if it is true that he is not involved in jobs and businesses, does it mean that he is not involved in all of them? Definitely not. Those jobs and businesses that the Lord Almighty is not involved are those that are done for selfish gain. Those businesses that are done for selfish gain, those are the businesses that the Lord Almighty is against. But not those that are done with the purpose of getting something to help the poor and even glorifying the Most High. Those jobs or those businesses that are done in order to gain something from the poor and even make them to suffer even more. Those are the businesses that the Lord Almighty is against. But not those that are done in order to gain something from the rich, so that he shall help the poor and spread the gospel. This is why Paul said in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28.
Anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. That they may have something to share with those in need.
Have you seen that? Paul was specific as to why some jobs are acceptable before the Lord. He said that when we work, we should do it so that we shall have something to help those in need. But he did not say that we should do it so that we shall have something just to use for ourselves. That is not the reason as to why we should work for income. But you happen to find that most businesses that people are doing, they are doing it for selfish gain, so that they shall have something to use for themselves. It is not even surprising if you happen to find that more than 95% of businesses and more than 95% of jobs, they are done for selfish gain. And because they are doing those work, for selfish gain, that is why they usually overcharge goods and services during high demand, even without caring how much they will oppress the poor. They overcharge very terribly until the poor are left with nothing to spend on other urgent needs. No wonder why the Spirit led me to speak against jobs and businesses. So making profit is not entirely wrong, but it is partially wrong. This is what the people of Israel were told by the Lord Almighty after making wealth.
You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your ancestors, as it is today. If you ever forget the Lord your God and follow other gods and worship and bow down to them, I testify against you today that you will surely be destroyed. Like the nations the Lord destroyed before you, so you will be destroyed for not obeying the Lord your God.
So it means that another thing that can make business to be bad, another thing that can make job to be bad, is pride. When you happen to think that it is your own strength which has produced wealth for you, when you happen to think that it is your own might which has produced wealth for you, that is when business can be bad. That is when job can be bad. But when you happen to do those work while prioritizing righteousness over everything, it can be okay. Even if Paul said that helping the poor should be the reason as to why we should work, there is nothing wrong with feeding ourselves and our families, and even paying rent so as to avoid eviction. This is because it is very clear to you and me that we also need to live, just like the way the poor also need to live a life. We can feed ourselves, but something that we must always prioritize is helping the poor and glorifying the Lord who created heaven and earth. And that is how our business and jobs will become acceptable before the Lord. And we shall not be among those merchants that were condemned in Revelation chapter 18 verse 3. Therefore, if you have an innocent conscience, do not be afraid. If you decide to do your job or your business without extorting money from the poor, and if you decide to do your job or your business so that you shall get something to help the poor, just know that you are not guilty before the Lord. When you do those jobs in order to get something to help the poor, you are not serving the money at all, but you are serving the Most High. When you decided to do that business or that job in order to have something to help the poor, you are not among the lovers of money that have been spoken about in 1 Timothy chapter 6 verse 10. Therefore, if you want to continue with your job or business and be spared of the condemnation that the merchants in Revelation chapter 18 verse 3 faced, follow the steps that I have explained to you. Follow the steps that I have explained to you and you shall be safe. When you do them, do not do them for selfish gain. And do not overcharge even during high demands. But this does not apply to all business. Some businesses, especially those that are harmful, including selling of illegal drugs, including selling of alcohol and illegal drugs, they need to be abandoned completely. This is something that even the state law is against in some cases. So what I was saying about ordinary businesses is like this. You see those businesses that are overcharging goods and services during high demand, even to the extent of exploiting the poor. Those are the businesses that the Lord Almighty is against. And those are the businesses that He identified them as the den of robbers, according to Mark chapter 11, from verse 15 to 17.
After entering Jerusalem, Yeshua went into the temple and looked around, taking note of what was happening. When the sun had set, he and the others left the temple and returned to Bethany for the night. The next morning, they left Bethany without having had breakfast. Seeing a fig tree in the distance with many leaves on it, Yeshua went there, hoping to find some figs. But it wasn't time yet for it to bear fruit. Yeshua was angry at the tree.
That's it! You've had your chance. Now you will never bear fruit again.
His disciples saw him do this. They walked on into the city, and then Yeshua went into the temple and started a small riot. He chased out anyone who was buying or selling in there, and he turned over the tables that the money changers were using. He kicked over the chairs of some people who were selling doves and would not let people carry anything.
It says in the law that Yahweh's house should be a place where people from any country can come to pray. But by doing all your business here in the temple, you have turned it into a den of thieves.
The religious leaders heard it, and they were more determined than ever to destroy him. But they feared him because so many people had become convinced that he was right in what he was saying.
Those people who were doing business in the temple and they were chased away by Yeshua. They were not doing the business, they were not doing those business so that they will get the money to help the poor. But they were doing it for selfish gain. And that is why Yeshua condemned them and drove them away from the temple. It was because they did it for selfish gain, and they would extort from the poor the little they had. Those businesses that are making money from the poor, and those businesses that can deny you the time to spend with the Lord, and even those jobs that can deny you the time to spend with the Lord, those are the jobs and businesses that the Lord Almighty is against. Any business that is using the deceitful means to attract customers, those are the business that the Lord Almighty is against. So jobs and businesses, they are not entirely wrong, but they are partially wrong. And that is why the Lord Almighty said that He shall bless the work of our hands. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 12. Now I understand why the Lord Almighty led me to preach against jobs and businesses. The reason as to why He did that is not because they are entirely wrong, but because they are partially wrong. I am not sure if there is a time that I have ever condemned entirely jobs and businesses in a YouTube video. But note this clearly, that even if there is a time that I have ever done that, whether it is in a YouTube video, or whether it is in the street preaching, or whether it is in a way that I live my life, it was not because I wanted to prevent people from going to work, but it was because I wanted to save people from wickedness by every means. Even if there is a time that I have been abstaining from jobs completely, it was not because I wanted to be lazy, but it was because I wanted to save myself from every kind of wickedness. If there could be any mistake that I did in that process, the Lord Almighty is merciful to forgive me, because He has said that if you confess our sins, He is faithful enough to forgive us. You know that wickedness is something that can cost us eternity, the eternity that is too costly beyond what you can think. And you know that the wickedness in this world is beyond measure. And 1 Timothy chapter 6 verse 10 is saying very clearly that the love of money is the root of all kind of evil. So if you happen to find, or if you happen to suspect that there was a time that I entirely condemned jobs and businesses, it was not because I wanted to stop anyone from going to work, and it was not because I wanted to be lazy, but it was because I wanted to save myself from every wickedness. Every wickedness that is associated with businesses. This process is like the water which has been polluted. And after the water which has been polluted, we happen to decide to pour the water away instead of filtering it. But if you happen to filter the water and throw the dirt away, and we use the water, it will be okay. So jobs and businesses can be partially wrong, but not entirely wrong. So those people who tried to insult me when I was living in rural, and those people who tried to make me to look bad, they do not have any valid reason to justify what they did, and to justify the insult they gave to me. They must repent. Otherwise, if they do not repent, they will face the eternal damnation. This is what Paul said. This is what Paul said in his letter to the Philippians. He said like this:
Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others.
This is what the Spirit of the Lord Almighty has said. He has said that whatever we do, we should not do it out of selfish ambition. We should not do it out of pride, and we should not do it out of selfish ambition. But because most businesses are done out of selfish ambition, that is why they are overcharging goods and services during high demand. For example, those who are doing matatu business, they happen to double the fare during peak hours, that one is really disgusting. It is not only a matter to businesses, but this kind of overcharging is common in many businesses. But this kind of overcharging is common in most businesses, extorting from the poor the little they have, and even making them to suffer even more. And after extorting from the poor the little they have, they use the money to live lavishly. This is why the Lord Almighty said that it is hard for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to enter the eye of a needle. Mark chapter 10, from verse 23 to 25. When Paul said like this, that we should not only look at our own interest, but the interest of others, do you know what it means? It means that when you are doing your business, and someone who is in need happens to come to you and does not have the money to buy anything from you, it is very advisable to help him for free. That is what it means. It means that if you are selling food and someone happens to come to you hungry without the money to buy food, it is better you feed him for free. It is better you feed him for free. By doing that, it will be an evidence that you care about the interest of others. But if you open to insist that he must have the money so that he shall give him the food, that one will be indeed the selfish ambition that Paul was talking about. The true nature of those who are not operating out of selfish ambition is to help those who are in need, even the time that they do not have the money to pay for the goods and services that they urgently need. That one is the true nature of those people who care about the interest of others, and they do not operate under the selfish ambition. Such people can never be among the merchants that were condemned in Revelation chapter 18 verse 3. This is what the Lord Almighty has said about the rich people who have hired their workers. He has said that they should not hold back their wages overnight. Leviticus chapter 19 verse 13. So it means that even if those workers are not working out of selfish ambition, they should still be paid. Because they also need a place to live, they also need something to eat, and they also need to survive. And they also need to have the ability to help other people who are in need. And those rich people who have hired their workers, they should not become dictators over their life, even to the point that they do not give them the time to rest and even worship their Lord. So even as I conclude this message, may you be aware that it is very true that we don't need jobs to survive. We don't need businesses to survive. Even Psalms 127 verse 2 is proving that we don't need jobs to survive and we should not depend on them. We should not make them to be our gods. The reason as to why I am saying that we don't need them to survive is because the people of Israel were given the things that they did not work for. According to Joshua chapter 24, from verse 12 to 14. That one is an evidence that we don't need jobs to survive. But this does not mean that we don't need them at all. This does not mean that we should avoid them completely. We may need them sometimes. And that is why the Lord Almighty has forbidden the rich people from holding back the wages of a hired worker, according to Leviticus chapter 19 verse 13. So it means that the Lord Almighty can decide that we survive by His grace without jobs and businesses. And sometimes He can decide to bless the work of our hands, as long as we are not doing it out of selfish ambition. So it means that we should not prioritize jobs and businesses for survival, but we should prioritize the Lord our Creator for survival. And when you do a job or a business, we should prioritize the interest of others, just like the way Paul has said in Philippians chapter 2 verse 4. May the grace of Yeshua be with you.